Ooh, this one should pique your guys' interest, if for no other reason than it's a good opportunity for you to hurl verbal abuse at these poor, innocent children of the Void. Soul Grinders have long been a topic of fierce debate in the Warhammer community, but love them or hate them, they are here to stay. And in fact, their homeland in the Forge of Souls is a core component of Game 3's campaign. So today, I want to break down the 4 demonic flavors available to the Forces of Chaos: Raspberry, Cherry, Lime, and Blueberry, and figure out which of their number is best, which is always a loaded debate because they serve different functions and roles, of course, but having used all 4 of them now, I feel quite confident in saying some of these are better than others. We're taking both campaign and multiplayer into consideration here, answering the question, how does each unit perform in a vacuum, in the context of the rosters they're a part of, and what do they bring to the table in terms of cost efficiency, utility, and raw damage output. As you might expect by looking at these monstrous hulks, they are indeed all tier 5 monsters, and in fact all cost the exact same in my current build, ringing in at a whopping 1900 gold, almost on par with Dragon Ogre Shaggus. So they are quite expensive, which can be a bit problematic in rosters where it's already difficult to afford large armies. Demons in general are very expensive, and it takes a long time to build the infrastructure required to unlock them, particularly for a faction like Khorne, who has substandard growth. Now, I am playing on Ultra Unit Size here, because that's what the majority of my campaign gameplay will be for the life cycle of Warhammer 3, I think. Ultra does skew the stats of single entity monsters slightly, because their ranged and melee DPS doesn't scale like it would for a unit of archers, for example. But with that said, you can still get a good idea of how the unit will perform in both game modes, campaign and multiplayer, whether you're testing on large or ultra. Here's a quick overview of the stats as a bit of a primer and side-by-side comparison before we jump into the specifics of each individual demon, and you'll notice that they share a similar profile in terms of speed, health, leadership, and charge bonus, which was a bit surprising to me, because I would have bet anything a Slaanesh Soul Grinder would be substantially more nimble than a Nurgle 1, and that the Plague Hulk would have by far the largest health pool. I think Creative Assembly could have gone a little bit further in differentiating them, but with that said, in some ways, they're further differentiated than I would have expected going into this game, so it's kind of some give and take there. I mean, these units really are quite different from each other regardless. So let's get started with Khorne, because this is what I would consider to be the standard look, the standard blend of Dark Future technology and Warhammer Demon. The Khornate Soul Grinder comes equipped with a flaming sword, a tri-barreled rotary cannon, reminiscent of heavy arms from Gundam Wing, shoutouts to my boy Troa Barton, and naturally is the best equipped for sustained melee combat against large blocks of enemy infantry. It's tied for the highest base melee attack at 55, deals flaming damage, which can be game-changing against the forces of Nurgle and the Ogre Kingdoms, and has 20% spell resistance, which every other variant lacks. Now, the strange thing about this version is that its secondary cannon is classified as a precursor attack, meaning he does not have a ranged attack button. You can still control what it shoots at by right-clicking, of course, but there's no visible fire arc or range indicator, and he's not treated like a range unit. So think of Levy Freeman in Rome 2. You couldn't just sit and pepper an enemy with javelins that efficiently. Their missile attack was intended to be used right before the charge. That's how it works here. If you right-click on a target, you will run into melee, which makes it a bit finicky. That 800 damage value really jumps off the page. It looks huge on paper, but the range is quite unimpressive at 120, less than standard archers, and it fires a scattershot like Necrofex Colossi, so 1 or 2 of the projectiles will frequently miss a single enemy target, like a Keeper of Secrets. It's really not designed to snipe out cav or single entities, because it will likely only get 1 or 2 volleys off before normal mounted troops can close it down. And it typically won't fire in melee either, so you lose some additional utility on that front as well. Where it excels is as support for Blood Crushers or Skull Crushers out on the flanks. The cannon can be quite devastating when fired down the length of enemy formations. Follow up a good shot with some rampaging heavy cav and the terror from this beast, and there will be some serious carnage on the other end. There simply aren't very many races in the game that will feel comfortable taking a mounted fight anywhere near this thing. The question is, does it justify the price at 1900 and offer anything truly unique or beneficial over something like a Bloodthirster? Well, it has amazing animations, certainly has some additional utility with that precursor cannon, and is a solid unit overall, but I wouldn't consider it even remotely approaching spectacular from a combat performance standpoint. It will more than hold its own in melee, although 35 melee defense is somewhat low, and the ability to switch between CQB and range can be quite nice, but there are other soul grinders that can do similar things better. In my opinion, it's middle of the road at best. Next up, we have the Slaanesh soul grinder, and things shall get loud now. This thing has the coolest animations out of all of them, letting loose sonic screams like the Noise Marines of 40k, and is designed as a monster duelist, which makes the Emperor Children quite pleased. Comes equipped with the Demon Bone Claw, giving it bone-crushing weapon strength, a slightly higher AP split than the Khorne version, with 25 extra armor piercing, bonus versus large, and is the only soul grinder without a ranged attack. How it makes up for that is the soporific musk that it releases in clouds, and the devastating flanker trait. Now, the contact effect from its cloying perfume lowers enemy melee attack and defense by 5, but is not an AoE passive. It will only target an enemy unit that you're actually attacking. Either way, 5 attack and defense can make a big difference in a duel, and when you pair that with 25 bonus versus large, it has 80 melee attack base against enemy monsters, which means it can be quite exceptional in that role. It certainly won't beat every single entity beast in the game, because that 35 melee defense will again hold it back, but it will take chunks out of anything, including freaks like Kolek. What's even more interesting is the devastating flanker passive, which will take its charge bonus from 50 to 100 when attacking in the flank or rear. This is less likely to proc against competent opponents in multiplayer, but can still make a huge difference in a goon fight, and it's surprising how often that double charge bonus will kick in, even when it looks like a unit is turning towards you to fight. So with a good charge into bogged down cav or SEMs from the flank or the rear, the Slaanesh Soul Grinder has the potential to just delete high value units from the game outright. But we already know that Keeper of Secrets are amazing for dueling. They have the Acquiescence spell for further dumpstering enemy melee stats, and they're faster. So does this version have an important role to play in the roster? Well, in this case, I think the 75 speed hurts it somewhat. If it was at 90 or 95 speed like I was expecting beforehand, it might even be overbearing at its price point, but as it stands currently, it will only barely outrun heavy cav and can't get on targets as quickly or efficiently as the greater demons of the roster. 75 speed is nothing to sneeze at, but it's not amazing either. I would argue most of your monster dueling needs are covered quite well by N'Kari and the generic Keeper of Secrets, but it performs its role very well at 1900 gold, so if you need something a bit cheaper that hits above its weight class, it can put in some serious work. And it pairs extremely well with a character like N'Kari. I would consider this version potentially quite good, probably the second best variant overall, and I think it has the potential to see some use in competitive, at least near launch. Next up, we have unquestionably the nastiest looking model in the game, the Plague Hulk, the soul grinder of Nurgle. This thing vomits like a sorority girl after a weekend bender, and looks like one too. Comes equipped with a Phlegm Bombardment Plague Launcher, 3-round burst mortar that explodes in a cloud of slurried sickness on impact, deals poison damage from range and in melee, and on first glance has the worst melee stats of the bunch. That is misleading, because it has the Cloud of Flies passive, often granting +9 melee defense while engaged in combat, which combined with poison damage means it's quite sustainable in a grind. This is first and foremost a ranged weapon though. It's a platform that functions as mobile artillery. Essentially, you plop him behind your lines or out on the flanks if it's safe, and just let him drop airstrikes over and over again on blobs of foot troops. The mortar strike is very good at clearing out hordes of infantry, and not just low armor chaff, but heavily armored troops as well. Even Zargard and armored Kossars will take a beating from its ranged attack, and it's important for me to note here that it can be supported by one of the best heals in the game, in the form of Fleshy Abundance from the lore of Nurgle, which is something none of these other soul grinders have access to. There's just no way to do a fair comparison of these units without taking into account how they can be supported, and healing is an area in which Nurgle excels, and we know how strong healing is in general. It can be game-changing for single entity monsters. So when you take a look at this unit's role within the Plague Father's roster, the synergy we see here is beautiful. You have one of the tankiest frontline infantry and lords in Warhammer, so you plop them into the melee grind, tar pit against hordes of enemy foot troops, then explode everything, which works incredibly well in campaign, and is still very much a viable tactic against a human opponent as well. And this is an area where Nurgle tends to struggle too. Their Plague Bearers and even their shock units are extremely survivable, but have middling to low melee attack and low charge bonus value. So their DPS is lacking, The Plague Mortar quickly makes up for that. It covers those weaknesses, ripping through armor and clearing out 10 to 25 models per volley. It will efficiently rack up more kills than any other Soul Grinder variant can possibly do, and fills a unique role in the roster that synergizes super well with how everything else for Nurgle plays. In my opinion, this Plague Hulk is the best Soul Grinder variant in the game currently, and is very much worth investing in. Which means our final version, the Warp Gaze Bird Boy of Tzeentch, has a tough act to follow here. Visually, his realm is the coolest, so bonus points for that, but this one comes equipped with a magical lance projectile meant for sniping out large targets from range. Essentially, he summons energies into that right fist of his, then hurls lightning bolts like Zeus from atop Mount Olympus. It has 5 tightly packed projectiles per volley, with 40 bonus versus large, and a 556 missile strength value with 250 range, so it can comfortably sit outside of enemy archer arcs and camp enemy monsters. It also has the barrier passive, which is exceptional for single entities, because they can often disengage before losing any health at all. About 9% of its total base health value is plopped atop in the form of an overshield that recharges when not taking any damage. This thing has 8200 health on Ultra, and about 780 barrier points on Ultra, so it can take a couple cannonballs to the face and receive minimal to 0 damage. Has the standard melee stats of a Soul Grinder, really no defining characteristics there one way or the other, but it is entirely meant as a sniper of enemy lords and creatures, using that range and bonus versus large to chunk them down before the main assault. Probably the most damning thing I can say about this unit is that Tzeentch really doesn't need help killing monstrous infantry or scary single entities. Blue horrors, pink horrors, and your plethora of ranged options will delete enemy monsters with very little effort. You can spam a 19 stack of your lowest tier chaff, blue horrors, and they will instantly obliterate someone like Kugath, who's one of the tankiest lords in the game, or a Stonehorn, one of the tankiest monsters in the game, as soon as they get into range. So I kinda question the need for it to fill the role of monster sniper when they already have so much cheap stuff that can focus fire enemy troops down really easily. Interestingly enough, it cannot fire while on the move like the Khorne Soul Grinder either, presumably because it has to wind up to throw, and it only has 10 ammunition, which is ultimately, I think, the downfall of this unit. I did some testing against elemental ice bears, which are the size of freaking mammoths, and the only way to make an appreciable dent in them was to fire the majority of your ammunition at it. You'll see in the gameplay here, some of the projectiles will even miss when the bears are moving, which just can't happen when you only have 10 shots to work with, and the target is that big and moving that slowly. It's not actually truly unique to the Tzeentch Soul Grinder. Units that size tend to have weird hitboxes. Mammoths are a good example, they'll often not get hit by magic missiles, for instance, but still, I found the damage output against big targets somewhat lacking, and it's really not very good against enemy infantry from downtown. It will perform decently in melee, of course, as all Soul Grinders will, and actually it might perform better in terms of cycle charging because of that barrier passive, but I don't think it's enough to make up for all its other downsides. If it had 20, 25 ammo, it could potentially be really scary and maybe even overpowered, but at 10 ammo, it just doesn't do enough to justify its price point, and only its melee stats and higher range provide a somewhat unique angle for the Tzeentch roster. I wouldn't call it terrible, but for me, both it and the Khorne Soul Grinder are the most underwhelming of the bunch, which is not to say you shouldn't use them in your armies. A 19 stack of Soul Grinders, or even 5 or 6 of them operating on the flank, would be devastating for many enemy armies to face in Warhammer 3. They are tanky, mobile, tier 5 terror-causing demons that can switch effortlessly between melee and ranged combat. But looking at what each unit roster offers, and how each Soul Grinder fits into that picture, I would probably put the Nurgle version at the best, and very much worth using, especially in campaign. The Slaanesh Soul Grinder second, especially in multiplayer as support for Nakari or an Exalted Keeper of Secrets, then probably the Khorne version third, and the Tzeentch version last. But that picture may change as I delve deeper into the campaigns and get more experience with and against them when I'm fighting against human opponents. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you all in the next one. Indie Pride, signing out for now. Have a good one, guys.